Good morning, Jay with Great Scott Audio Productions and Bitten by Books, Book Bites. This week's festivities, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, will be Barb and J.C. Hendee's Dhampir, the first in the Noble Dead series. This one is kind of a departure from what I guess I normally read. This is actually pure fantasy, so it's dark fantasy and high fantasy. Which I really don't do a whole lot of, primarily because, I love it. I grew up on it. But for the most part, those books are so mainstream, if you will. Terry Brooks, for example, or the Eddings books, and that sort of thing. And it's kind of an acquired taste. This stuff, however, these books have a kind of a modern taste to them, even though they are a completely fantasy world. The main characters, Mugir and Lysil, are just awesome. Just such amazing characters. And the storyline, just huge arc, and beefy and potent and creepy and dark, and it just really does suck you in and keep you there. And you kind of want to meet these guys. You want to know who they are. You want to hang out with them. You want to go and do things with them. You want to have these adventures. So let's go ahead and start and have an adventure, shall we? The village appeared deserted but for the thin trails of smoke escaping clay chimneys to drift up and dissolve in the darkness. All doors were barred, all window shutters latched tight, until only the barest wisps of light from candles or lamps seeped between their cracks. There was no one in the village's muddy center path to see the night-shadowed object flitter toward a cottage near the tree line. The shadow stopped, hesitating next to the cottage. Slowly its form shifted and expanded as it ceased to consciously hide itself. Nothingness became booted feet and reaching arms, a tall and slim torso, a head with two pinprick glimmers for eyes. It scaled a tree rapidly and jumped onto its goal. Settling upon the thatched roof, it slid on its belly to crawl head first down one wall. Then it stopped, poised at the top of a shuttered window. One finger extended to slip a claw-like fingernail between the shutters. Prying and pulling, it worked at the shutter until the latch finally gave with a sharp snap. The figure paused, waiting, listening for an answering sound from within the room. When none came, it pulled the shutters open. On a bed inside lay a small old woman. Long silver hair tied in a braid rested next to her head across a yellowed linen pillow. A faded patchwork quilt of carmine and teal squares covered her. The creature hung its head down through the window. Its voice sounded like an echo across a vast plain as it whispered, "May I come in?" The old woman moved slightly in her sleep. Again the voice asked, with a touch of yearning, "Please, old mother, may I come in?" She moaned and rolled, her face turning to the window. On her wrinkled brow was a small white scar, half smothered by the creases of aged skin. Her eyes remained closed, in sleep, as she murmured in reply, "Yes, yes, come in." The visitor reached one arm through the opening and upward to set its fingernails in the wall. It crawled over the upper edge of the window, letting its feet swing inward, then dropped soundlessly to the bedroom floor. Crossing to the bed, it quickly reached out and with one hand and clamped it down over the old woman's mouth. She woke, eyes wide and frightened, but only for a brief moment. She stared with an empty gaze into the eyes above her. The night visitor relaxed its grip, lowering its head to her throat. All in the room became still and quiet and timeless. Then its head swung up to stare at the open window. A dark stain covered the side of the old woman's throat, The visitor began to lower its head again to the old woman, but paused. With an owl tilt of its head, its gaze returned to the window as it listened. Outside, someone was walking on the village path. The visitor moved to the window. Strolling along the village path was a young woman wearing studded leather armor and high, soft boots pulled over earth-colored breeches. In one hand she held a short pole, and the other a long knife with which she worked at sharpening the pole's end to a crude point. At her side hung a short falchion in its worn leather scabbard. The night was too dark for most eyes, but as the woman passed between moon shadows of cottages and nearby trees, the visitor saw her dark hair with hidden shimmers of red that offset smooth young skin little more than 2 decades of age. No true fear or wariness showed in the woman's posture as she moved through the village, fashioning the short wooden spear. "Hunter," it whispered to itself with amusement. The pathetic humor of what it saw was too much to hold in, and it laughed under its breath as it leaped out the window to spider-walk up the cottage wall onto the roof. The dark form shrank and vanished into the night forest. Chapter 1. Long past sundown, McGear walked into another shabby Stravian village without really seeing it. Peasants lived it the same way everywhere. All their bleak, shapeless huts began to blur together after 6 years, and McGear only noted the number as a gauge of population. No more than 100 people lived here, and perhaps as few as 50. None showed themselves this late in the night, though she heard the creak of a door or window shutter as she passed by, someone peeking out when she wasn't looking. The only other sound was the scrape of her hunting knife on the hard wood as she sharpened the end of the short wooden pole no longer than her arm. Darkness didn't frighten her. It suggested to her none of the fear-conjured threats that made these peasants shudder behind their barred doors. She checked her falchion in its sheath, making sure she could draw it out easily if needed, and continued her stroll down toward the far end of the village. A drizzle of rain began, which soon matted down her black hair, smothering any crimson tint it might have shown in the light. With her pale skin, she must have looked as baneful to the villagers as their vision of the creature they'd hired her to eliminate. So just a little taste. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.